Welcome to Space Matters, the Space Governance Podcast, where the Australasian Centre for Space Governance invites experts from across the Asia-Pacific region and around the world to discuss with us the most pressing issues of space governance, policy, and law. We acknowledge that many members of the ACSG live and work on Indigenous country. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations as knowledge holders of responsible governance of lands, waters, and skies. Hi, and welcome to this new episode of Space Matters. I'm Dr. Cassandra Steer, CEO of the Australasian Centre for Space Governance. And for this episode, in fact, 2 episodes, we're doing something a little different. Recently, the ACSG hosted a workshop for what's called WRegSAT, or the Workshops on the Regulation of Space Activities and Technologies. WRegSAT is a multi-year project under the umbrella of the ACSG in partnership with the University of New South Wales. And what it sets out to do is, as a groundbreaking initiative, is to run a series of workshops. We do about 3 per year, that bring together experts to examine the most pressing regulatory issues in the Australian space sector. We focus on a specific regulatory challenge, and at the end of each year or series, we produce a regulatory options paper. In our first year, in 2025, we were actually scoping what the issues are, where there are regulatory gaps, what the existing regulations are, both domestic and international, that apply to all sorts of space activities. And there's a foundational paper that is being released mid-2026 as a result of that first scoping year. Then in February of 2026, we met for the first workshop of our second series, Series 2, in which we were focusing on what the key issues and challenges are for in-space activities. So things like on-orbit servicing, things that are going on in cislunar, what kinds of activities Australia is already doing or is likely to do, and what kind of regulations we think should be in place. So the regulatory options papers that we're producing don't purport to actually sketch out draft regulations, but really to provide an overview to all stakeholders, to industry, to academia and research, and very importantly to government, including the Australian Space Agency, but also other governmental departments. And I guess we hope to central government to really get an eye on what we think the options are for putting in place a regulatory framework that would support Australian space capabilities to really do what they need to do, which is solve problems for Australians. So during this workshop, I pulled aside various people to have little conversations with them and recorded them individually. And so what you're going to hear now is a series of one-on-one conversations. And we're going to start with Lesley Sutton, who is a senior partner at Gilbert Tobin, who is the funding partner for the WRegSAT series currently. Gilbert Tobin is an amazing international law firm, and they have their own space law practice. Lesley is the chair of WRegSAT. She has enormous experience as a practicing lawyer, as a partner in a law firm, and now collaborating together with academic experts and practitioners across the sector. And so we had a chat about why Gilbert Tobin thinks that WRegSAT is so important. So I'm sitting here with Lesley. So you are the chair of WRegSAT. But first I want to ask you how you came into space law, because you said yesterday you have a lot of a background in sort of technology and law more broadly.
Yeah, so I fell into technology and law. I did science law, doing computer science, and that sort of took me down a path of wanting to work as a lawyer dealing with technology subject matter, because I actually find the tech more interesting than law, be frank. And so in a 30-year career, I've seen sort of waves of technology regulation come through. So it was telecommunications deregulation in Australia when I started, and then it was the dot-com era, the internet era, and then obviously the hot topic has been AI regulation for the last couple of years probably. So I was sitting down one day trying to work out what the next thing coming on the horizon was, and space law was the obvious one. But apart from all of that, I guess space law is fun.
Yeah. It is fun. But did you grow up did you have an interest in space? Are you one of these sci-fi people or looking up at the stars and thinking that?
I'm not a sci-fi person particularly, looking up at the stars, yes, but not a burning interest. I think my interest is more the tech side rather than space for the sake of space.
Yeah, same for me. I never grew up being a sci-fi fan or thinking about space at all. No. So, we all come to it in meandering pathways and then get very involved in what's becoming more and more an important topic. And then, so tell us about your role at Gilbert and Tobin.
So I am a partner in the tech and digital team. Most of what I do is large-scale procurement of complex technology, usually in infrastructure context, which lends itself to space because that's effectively what space is, or what I guess my interest in space is, which is that large-scale deployment of technology into space. So together with Standen, we've established the space law team at Gilbert and Tobin, which is primarily working with operators often coming into the Australian market for the first time and establishing operations here.
And so what kind of operators are they? Is that space situational awareness? Is it telecommunications?
So the people we've worked with to date have actually been satellite operators generally. Sometimes it's a bit broader than that. Sometimes it's people performing maintenance operations, that sorts of thing. But on
the infrastructure, the ground segment.
Yeah. But the larger operators that we've worked with have been actual satellite operators or launch operators.
Yeah, that's really exciting to be. Yeah, it's very sector facing, and I think some law firms have kind of seen the opportunity and said, well, we will be the if we've worked with startups, we can do that for the space sector. We can do their employment and labour contracts. We can do their kind of business law stuff and just serve the space sector. But I think Gilbert and Tobin has really looked at the space technologies and said you want to do more than just be a business law firm provider to what happens to be the space sector.
That's right. So we do have a startup business that works with startups generally across a number of sectors, and yes, they work with startups in the space sector as well, but Luke and I are much more focused on the sort of business operational side of it. So they're getting the regulatory approvals, the licensing for the technology, the deployment of the technology, that side of things.
Yeah. So really dealing with the space legislation in Australia. And with the Australasian Centre for Space Governance, we were talking to you already prior when we were the Australian Centre. So we've been in conversations with Gilbert and Tobin for a few years now, I think, which has culminated in Gilbert and Tobin now and your space law team sponsoring WRegSAT, the first and the second series, which is really great. Is it? We're in the second series now. We're talking about in-space operations. Did we get to where you had hoped last year with the first series? Like, is it what you thought it would be, or is it something entirely different?
We came into it with a bit of a blank sheet of paper, to be honest, so I didn't really know what to expect as an outcome. I think I was initially a little bit challenged by the idea that Series 1 was just going to be a what are we doing exercise rather than produce itself a reform report. Now that we are where we are in Series 2, I'm a lot more comfortable with that, and I can see where we're heading, and I can see there's a vision, and I can see that there's it's quite an exciting prospect now, I think. But yeah, I really didn't know what to expect coming into it.
I mean, we've been saying yesterday we were kind of building the ship as we were sailing it last year, but now we have the ship. We know where to go.
I think it's a lot clearer where we're going.
Yeah, and I imagine too, because it was probably a bit more intuitive or natural for those of us who are academics to say we need to spend a year scoping and figuring out what the questions are, and whereas you're used to working on much tighter timelines. So there was probably also just a difference in epistemic approaches.
I think that's actually right. I had that conversation last night with someone else who's not an academic. It is a bit different. We're very much used to timelines and deliverables and things, whereas this has been much more an evolutionary process.
By the same token, I think there's something for us to learn from, you have to deliver the deliverable by a certain date, because we have been having a lot of conversations about scope.
Yes.
And making sure that we're focusing on the most important output, which is providing a regulatory options paper by the end of this year, with the key audience being the space agency. Who else do you think is an audience for that apart from the space regulator?
Well, I think industry is, definitely, and it's great that we've got Sia in the room for this series too. And so when we started out, we talked about the community more broadly. I don't know if they really will be the audience, but I think the academic community probably is.
Yeah, and I think both for our kind of conclusions and options that we propose, but also for the areas that we decide we're not going to cover this, either it doesn't fit within scope or we just have to limit it to get to a certain output. I think highlighting some of the issues that need further attention is what will be really interesting to the academics. The bits that we said actually we're not going to, they're not a top priority in the short term, but they are interesting for research in the long term.
I think there'll be quite a bit of that coming out of it, actually.
Yeah. Well, then we'd be doing our job properly if we were scoping properly. So
That's your job.
That is my job. Yes. Well, excellent. Thank you so much because you've really advocated for it, and I'm sure you had to advocate internally at Gilbert and Tobin as well to say this is worth putting funding and time into.
I was pleasantly surprised. I got a really positive reaction really quickly when I raised it. So I think people are excited by the idea.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great. That shows that GNT is GNT sees the business
vision.
case in it. And the vision. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The next conversation I had was with Luke Standen, who is also a lawyer at Gilbert and Tobin. He has various different practice areas, but he's taken an interest in space, as he explains, through having worked in technology, not dissimilar to Lesley's background. And he talked a lot about the pathways into space law and the value of RegSAT. Yeah, well, we went around the room yesterday and we all said kind of what's our background and how do we get to be here. So what's your background? How did you get to be doing space law?
Yeah, so my background, I studied science, so forensic science and law at university. So I have a bit of a science background, a bit of a science brain. I'm a bit of a nerd.
I'm wearing my big space nerd socks.
I know, and yesterday you were wearing a space-themed shirt, which wasn't lost on me. Some people didn't notice until dinner, and I was like, didn't you see that during the day?
Thank you for noticing.
No. And so I obviously became a technology lawyer, like sort of tech and telecoms. And then maybe 5 years ago or something, I started to read, more about space, low Earth orbit satellites. Started to see that it was going to be cause a shift change in telecoms, and that was really my foray into space law and understanding like what is behind launching things into space, what law applies, and like looking to try and get into advising clients in that area. So,
and you'd already been practicing law before that. What area of law were you doing?
So I'm a tech and telecoms commercial lawyer, but it's a really broad church. That it encompasses advising on telco regulation, advising on privacy law, advising on, primarily it's major project contract work, so drafting and negotiating contracts, but there's a big part of it that is also regulatory advice, which now encompasses space law.
And that's a really good, because I get constant emails from students or young graduates saying, really interested in the pathway into space law and, how do I kind of break in? And my answer, if I ever get time to answer those emails, tends to be, figure out if you want to work in private practice or for government or for a law firm or for a space company or another tech company as an in-house lawyer, which means you're not going to be dealing with quote unquote space law, but you have to figure out what kind of practice of law appeals to you, and then you need to lean in and get really good at contracts or really good at administrative law or really good at labour law because you want to be an in-house lawyer. And that is how you get into the sector, rather than thinking I want to talk about the Outer Space Treaty.
Yes, exactly, unless you want to be an academic who talks about the Outer Space Treaty, and then maybe it can be a bigger part of your life. But I think for most, there are obviously lawyers in Australia who focus primarily on the space sector, but I think in large commercial law firms that's a rarity. Like it's really a part of your practice and your skill set, and certainly that's the case for me and for us. And we're trying to grow it as part of the practice, and that's the reason why we're here. And I just find it really, really interesting. Like it's a fascinating area.
And what do you think is the value then of RegSAT? I mean, obviously there's value to it, but you know, if you're saying we want to grow this as an area, like is this, because we're halfway through day 2 now, and we often get off track on discussions because someone will say something that's really interesting, not entirely relevant to where we want to get to with this year's topic, but we all start digging into, oh, that's interesting, and have debates. So what is the value of RegSAT for the kind of audience that you work with, like for your clients, or is it more for Gilbert and Tobin itself?
I think it's a mix of those things. So it's like, partly it's a learning opportunity. So it's, you know, having to, I guess, think about things that we may not have ever been asked yet in practice. And particularly in Series 2, like focusing on in-orbit activities. Like that's not something that we've had to specifically advise on yet. And so having to, I guess, being forced to look into it early, get across it, listen to so many perspectives and people who have thought about it long and hard for years, you kind of absorb some of that knowledge, you pick up some of the issues, you can then, if somebody asks you, like I'm going to be equipped to talk about it off the top of my head, you know, which is really valuable to clients. Or if I go to an event or something like that, if I haven't been forced to look into it before, you know, I'm time poor. So it's not like I have all the time in the world to be reading about this stuff. Like I have a really broad practice. So this kind of forces you to think about those things. And I think that's really valuable. There's also the learning opportunity from such a big group of people who are experts in their respective fields to absorb that knowledge. So personally, that's what I get out of it. And in terms of the firm, I mean, obviously it's a branding exercise. It's giving you something to talk about in the area. If clients don't know you know about something, they're never going to approach you about it. Right. I think maybe half the work we've gotten has been through speculative things of a partner in another practice group emailing all the partners saying, does anyone know space law? Because I've got a client who wants a large firm that knows space law. And then we can say yes, and this is what we know about it, and this is what we've done in the area, and you know, and this is just another thing to add to that, to add credibility to our offering, really.
So some of it's contextual rather than necessarily what you'd be applying for a client, right? Like understanding the bigger picture of what's going on.
I think it's both. There's definitely a big contextual piece, particularly around international law and getting an understanding of what's happening, you know, out there. But yeah, I think there is definitely there's learnings we can apply for clients as well, for sure.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think the mutual, like we're all learning from each other. That's what's the value of having an interdisciplinary. We have a space ethicist. We have, you know, someone who does astrophysics. We have someone who's been around the Australian space sector since the 1990s. We have someone who does the administrative end of stuff. We have academics. We have the Indigenous expertise. Like it's really,
it's a broad church.
It's a broad church, and that, like, so we all get individual value out of that. But obviously, what we're aiming to do is come up with, having canvassed what are the priority legal issues for Australia to look at, and now we're going to do a deep dive this year and then come up with a regulatory options paper. That would have been a pretty, you know, limited or immature product had it just been a group of academics who think about international space law, right? Like we need to have that multidisciplinary expertise to come up with a valuable outcome.
And even for us, like, I mean, the discussion this morning where I raised that admin law point, because I can just see, you know, a client gets an overseas payload permit and they get some condition whacked in there that they're like, why, like, how, on what basis is this condition in here? And then that could be something that I have to advise on. Like, you know, so that is a real world thing that people are going to have to think about in the near future, if not very near future.
I think, and I think it's coming down the line faster than we expect. But it really is, because I don't think about administrative law ever, and to suddenly go, hang on a sec, the Australian Space Agency is responsible mostly for this single piece of legislation, but it's going to get more and more complex, and there are administrative law issues in there, and so Awesome. Well, it's really great having Gilbert and Tobin support RegSAT. It's really great having you in the room, and I'll let you have your morning tea now.
We're probably about to go back in.
I think we are.
It's all right. I can eat cake while other people talk. So.
Let them eat cake.
Exactly.
During one of the breaks, Zamara and I had a chat. Zamara Rodriguez works at the Space Industry Association of Australia, or SIA. And she talked to me a lot about her story of starting in the space industry, what it was like for her coming into Australia as an outsider, and what it is to be working together with the space industry in Australia. And it was during one of the breaks, so there's a bit of a background noise, but I really enjoyed the conversation with her. Hi, Zamara.
Hi, Cassandra.
Tell us a bit about yourself. So you're from Colombia. How long have you been in Australia for?
So I've been in Australia for around 7 years. I moved here first to study English. I did law in Colombia and I wanted to do international law. So I came to Australia, do a few years of English, and that's it.
So is Colombia's civil law, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now you've come to do international law in a common law country.
Yeah.
Is it really different?
Actually, I did also law here in Australia. So
I see the common
yeah. So I just finished it probably a few weeks ago, my last exam. So it's thank you. It's very different.
Yeah.
I think one of the subjects it was really difficult was equity. Of course, because it's completely different to what we normally have in Colombia. But also, everything is different. Of course, it's a little bit of confidence there because you don't speak the language, but also, it was hard at the beginning, but managed to finish everything.
Yeah, it's similar to my journey, though, in the opposite direction, because I started my law degree in Australia, and then I moved to the Netherlands to do international law, and then decided I wanted to do a civil law degree and had to improve my Dutch to do it in Dutch. So that's been your journey in terms of law. And what brought you then to space law?
Well, this part is interesting because I was in ANU doing the masters, and I started reading the papers you were doing in space while I was there in ANU. I wanted to focus in diplomacy before, but then I have some subjects like national security or global security as well, and things these kind of subjects. I was I want to do research here, but I didn't want to go the basic classic model everyone choose. So I went to space. So I was always trying to do space, environmental space, and different kind of interesting topics. And everyone always recommended, you should speak with Cassandra, But I think you weren't teaching at the time. But I recall reading your papers. I recall you were in some podcasts as well, the National Security podcast with ANU. So actually you inspired me.
That's so good to hear. Thank you. I'm so glad.
And then I was in diplomacy first. I was in diplomacy. I went to Tanzania to work with an NGO there. Palestine too, but then after that I decided that I didn't want to do any more of that, and I was okay, what am I gonna do now? And then that is when I changed of career and I start going towards oh, hold on, I did some research in space at uni, so I might just focus on that. It was hard to get in at the first step because I was an Australian citizen. Obviously no holding a clearance shed and all this kind of stuff, so it was a hard industry, but I managed to go through volunteer programs, SJC, all what I could do, and here I am.
And so now you work at the Space Industry Association of Australia, and you do policy research for them?
So my focus initially, I have been in that company for 2 years, and I've been in 3 roles already. So the first one was as an executive assistant. So I was managing all the governance. The second one was as industry analyst, so working more directly with members. And the last one was workforce development. So I got to work as an Ep2 industry fellow, doing different programs for workforce development, developing a national mentoring program, internship program, so helping young professionals to get into the industry. And I felt very kind of particularly identified with that because, of course, it was a touching area for me, supporting other students to manage to find a clear pathway into the space industry.
It's so great. And so you started in an executive assistant role, which might not have been your kind of desirable career path, but that was the doorway in for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I always have the mindset, and that is the same advice I give to people that want to get into the space industry, is that your first job doesn't have to be space directly. You can just make your way through that. My first job, obviously, when I applied for that role, they were like, hold on, you are overqualified for this, what are you doing? And I said, I don't care, I just want to get in, and that's it. But that was the approach I took. I know a lot of people, they just and it's nothing bad with that, but they're just really driven and they just want to get directly into space. And it's sometimes a hard industry, especially in Australia, that is small and it's just still growing. So it's just like baby steps. That's probably what I would suggest.
Yeah, I'm going to come around again to, and so just the last question is, so now you're involved in the RegSAT.
Yeah.
So from Sia's perspective and also from your perspective, what do you think is the importance of this project? Why is Sia involved and why are you involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's super two reasons for why I'm involved in this project. So now I'm working in the policy side of Sia as well. It's not only workforce. The first one, of course, is representing Sia. That is representing the voice of the industry. I always think with these kind of projects, it's always good to bring what the industry thinks and how the industry, even you can do that through surveys or directly industry consultations, because that is just I have seen a lot of projects where it's amazing on the paper, but industry say, hold on, I don't think we need that. And that is even an experience I have with the CPD program at the beginning, with workforce development at the beginning, with a CPD program. And when we did industry consultation, they said, no, we don't need that. So that's kind of what CA is doing at this stage. She's representing when the consultations came, we were keen to speak with industry, understanding what they need and be able to translate that in the final paper. And of course the second one is a personal reason. So I do love, of course, anything related to space law, and I see this as a great opportunity, especially to learn from amazing people like everyone has PhDs and super well experienced in the industry. So it's as a personal growth for me too.
Yeah, that's really great. It's really great to have you be part of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So the RegSAT workshop is a couple of days long where we are identifying which issues we want to cover. We're talking also about how to really integrate Indigenous perspectives, including a notion of stewardship or custodianship. And we talk quite a lot about the notion of Maa Bullarbu, is a term that has been gifted to us by an Indigenous elder, Dean, who works at Deloitte. And we are grappling a lot with what it means if we work in industry or in regulation or even in academia, what it is to think truly long-term. So we talk about long-term sustainability, we talk about the sustainability from a business case, but what is it to think in terms of 7 generations? The effects of our decisions today carry on intergenerationally, and that lens can be quite a challenge when we're thinking on much, much shorter time horizons. So this next conversation is not with an expert in Indigenous governance or Indigenous perspectives, but it's with Joel Lisk, Dr. Joel Lisk, who is at Flinders University. He also has a private practice on the side where he works a lot with clients who are in space industry in Australia to help them navigate regulation, particularly around launch permits. He and I had quite a chat about space business and space operations, but also what it is to try and apply that intergenerational, multi-generational, long-term lens when there are different competing interests. And I don't think we solved it at all, but I do hope you enjoy the conversation I had with him. So Joel, you practice law and are an academic at the same time. And a lot of people say they do both, but you actually do both. How do you manage to do both? Do you sleep?
No, there is absolutely no sleep at all involved. No, it's a matter of balancing. I think it's what I'm saying is the work life is interesting. Academia is a unique profession in the sense that you have a lot of time and you get to allocate your time. And it's
that's not my experience of academia, but okay.
And very flexible in allegedly how the time is allocated. So I view my practicing work as an extension of my academic work. One informs the other and vice versa. So they kind of go hand in hand. I practice specifically in space business and space operations, which means the academic work informs the practice work, and then the practice and the actual doing then helps shape the academic views. So I kind of view them together. Of course, I have appropriate answers, which is that my jobs are very separate. I do one in personal time and one in university time. And that is a very clear delineation of how things actually work in reality. But I kind of don't see them as too separate. I see them as informing each other, but time-wise, they're very different.
But you also have, I guess most people who have some kind of private practice or consulting on the side of their academic work. Of course, it has to do with their expertise, but I think it's probably quite unique that you get to kind of be on the cutting edge of the research around not just Australian space legislation, but various aspects around there. And then also some of your clients are space companies, so you're helping them apply for licenses and navigate the Australian space regulatory environment.
Yeah, and it's also navigating the foreign ones as well, trying to identify the gaps, the opportunities. I shouldn't just say gaps, we're not just operating in gaps on purpose, but trying to find those spots that are advantageous, but then open up. From the academic perspective, of course, we want to look at things from what is fair, what is reasonable, what is appropriate in the circumstances, which doesn't always align with the commercial interests. It's very much about, well, we do have financial considerations, we've got commercial considerations, how are we doing things efficiently for a customer? And those don't always align with what might be an academic approach. We like to put a layer of sustainability and harm mitigation on top, but they don't always necessarily speak to commerciality.
So, and that's a really interesting thing that we keep coming back to in our discussions here at RegSAT. In fact, you could say like the third perspective is the government regulator perspective, which is looking mostly in terms of risk mitigation, keeping it a low risk. Of course, they are also interested in setting up a regulatory environment that's going to support industry, but their own interest is about lowering risk, avoiding risk, mitigating risk. So you've kind of got I guess at least 3 different layers coming in. We also have lawyers here in private practice. We also have an ethicist. And then on top of that, or perhaps I should say underneath all of that, the foundation is really bringing in Dean Sanders and Amos Taylor, bringing in a sense of thinking beyond the immediate and trying to think 7 generations, like what are the longer term impacts? What's our custodial responsibility? So I'm wondering whether, are we being too aspirational? Because as you said, like a commercial actor has really short-term economic survival and then hopefully profit as their key interests. Is it too aspirational to even say, well, our regulatory environment should be trying to think with a custodian approach and 7 generations? Yeah,
there's an interesting tension in there. And I acknowledge this when looking at the problems, kind of going, well, particularly the 7 generation approach, we're probably looking at a time horizon of maybe 300-400 years, at least in that approach. I can't think of a company that's existed for that long. We don't think of companies, and shareholders don't look at companies in the context of, well, I'm going to think about the profits that derive from my shares and my investment in 300 years' time. They're thinking about, well, I want a realisation of my investment within a 10 to 15 year timeline at most. So when there is no necessary regard to the long-term impact from an investment perspective and from a commercial return perspective, and a company exists to benefit its shareholders and its corporate mission. So there is a conflict there, that this idea of commerciality will I don't want to say necessarily conflict with a long-term approach, because some businesses take a more considered approach. You can balance profit against custodianship and sustainability and reasonability in that circumstance, but it's a very fine line to tread, and it's one that some particularly sustainable focused businesses will look at now and go, well, what can we trade off? Are we willing to take a 7, 8, 9, 15% hit to our profit margin if we're adopting sustainable practices at this point? And is there benefits to that in other ways, non-financial ones?
But does it have to be either or? I mean, 7 generations is not a time horizon that I think Western folks are used to dealing with anyway. So, but even if we think, the UN guidelines on long-term sustainability, if we think about intergenerational responsibility, if we think about wanting humanity to be able to continue to benefit from technologies in the space environment here on Earth, then we can't keep launching at the pace that we're launching. We can't keep using materials that are going to interrupt astronomy. We can't keep creating a contested and congested environment. So their business case has to have some kind of sustainability built in. Otherwise, their business model isn't going to last, right?
Yeah, but the business models tend to be still quite reflective, as we said, in a Western culture, reflective of a short-term profit horizon, kind of in the context of this 7 generations approach.
But surely you want your business to last more than 5 years.
You would, and the problem then becomes is, well, how far would a business startup founder be looking? Would they be looking? They might be looking to themselves. They might be thinking about their kids. They might be thinking about their grandkids. But are they thinking of their grandkids, I think is the level it's at. And I would suggest that a lot of businesses wouldn't be thinking that far ahead from a more of a practical perspective, because if they've got third-party external investment, a lot of them would turn around and go, well, why are you wasting time thinking about that? And we should be thinking about investment. But I don't think it's necessarily incompatible, though, that there is the capacity and the ability to think forward and ahead. It might not be on the same time horizon, but it might be on a shorter one, thinking 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ahead. And debris mitigation requirements on deorbiting approaches are starting to think about those more and more. It's just a matter of extending the timeline progressively as we think forward. So today we might be thinking 30 years ahead. Maybe next year we've started to go, well, actually, how does our operation work in 40 years ahead, and stretching out that commercial thinking progressively over time, and one that's not as focused on immediate profit today. But of course, that still has the conflict with effectively Western capitalist-based societies.
Sure, exactly. And I guess I still think it can be and perhaps not 7 generations. Perhaps that's asking too much. I think we're trying to ask ourselves to introduce that as a framework for what we're working here at WRegSAT, to push ourselves. But even if it's at the very least, to mitigate potential harm in the future is a corporate social license these days, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing more of now, is recognition that businesses are not just there for profit. Well, if they are for profit, there are consequences to their actions. We see a lot of this with on the ground here in Australia in particular, is like mining companies and resource extraction-based companies on the ground do have to think about environmental management. There is a lot of criticism and critique of these businesses when they do ridiculously excessive extraction or environmental damage, and there's a recognition that that's not on, and there's a need to think forward. We're still not seeing it from a long-term perspective, I don't think. I think courts will still look at it, and there's no duty of care to think about the future in terms from an environmental perspective. Regulators and legislatures are not necessarily pushing the boundaries too much, because they're still on the edge of this idea of, well, we need jobs, profit, prosperity today. Yes, we need to protect the future, but it's not our lifetimes. We can't conceptualize that too well ourselves. But again, I think this comes into a societal construction perspective, that as an Australian society, we're based on an idea of capitalist approaches, kind of inherited from our colonial backgrounds. That's where we've come from as a society. That's how it's set up, and that's how we end up thinking. And it takes a lot to challenge that, and particularly around corporate structures that have been built around profit as the underlying idea. Like, I think we've had discussions in the room about who is ultimately responsible. Is a company responsible for the action, or is the individual responsible for the action? And our entire corporate system is built on the idea of the company is the entity. You can't pierce the corporate veil except in exceptional circumstances. So from a legal perspective, we go, well, actually, it's the business that's responsible, not the people who are running it. And so there's these interesting assumptions, presumptions, and inherent, I don't want to call them limitations, because they're still constructions of what we do, but the presumptions of how our society operates are going to have to be pushed a little bit around this long-term thinking.
I don't know if you track this at all, but do you think Australia's a bit behind in that respect? Because even in the Western capitalist and Eurocentric tradition in Europe, you're seeing courts, you're seeing successful litigation around intergenerational responsibility, environmental responsibility. So those are not space sector, but we are dealing with a technology sector, so it doesn't matter. Do you think Australia's a bit behind in that?
I think it comes into how the society and culture has been built. I think European countries are, I don't want to use the word progressive, but that's kind of the kind of a sign what we, as Australians, will describe them as. The more progressive jurisdictions, we look at them with inherently codified human rights obligations, which creates this need to think about the person. Here in Australia, we don't have any guaranteed human rights as a society. We have an implied freedom of political communication that comes under scrutiny constantly. Some states have some legislation, but it creates this. It removes the human from the conversation, which changes the regulatory presumptions. Like, we have compatibility with human rights statements and all that sort of thing, but we don't have to actually respect those rights.
Yeah,
we can avoid them.
Rights. Yeah.
And so it changes the dynamic. Although the US has a Bill of Rights, it has codified human rights, and their thinking is very different. But I think that's a long-term entrenched ideological and societal construction around this idea of wealth generation and the power of the individual in the now.
Exactly. It's all about the individual, and it's nothing to do with the societal impact. It has become hyper-individualized, yeah. the libertarian approach. But I mean, if you look at our neighbours in the Asia Pacific, and then sort of, I'm thinking back to, space regulation again and space activities. We see countries like the Philippines which deal with natural disasters, sometimes 3 back-to-back in the space of a few weeks, earthquake, tsunami, and Malaysia similarly, they have really lent into, and Philippines in particular, are really taking their role as a space diplomat very seriously, and the opportunity to become a leader in the Asia Pacific region around a sense of responsible norms, responsible space governance, sustainability. So I think, and at the same time as building an industry, having national missions that are funded by government that understands how critical they are. So I think it's, I think you're right about those kind of socio-political histories, but I think there's an opportunity for us to shift as well.
And I think you're right, like the Asia Pacific, they see the consequences of a lack of foresight. They feel the consequences. They've, particularly in Pacific nations, the sea levels are rising, their literal lives, culture, society is at existential risk. And they feel that immediately, which leads into the thinking more broadly. Here in Australia, we've had natural disasters I don't want to say frequently, but with increasing frequency, like flooding, fires. These things can be attributed to climate change and what we've done to the planet, but there is still no acceptance of that in a uniform manner. There's still pushback going, well, these things are changing, yes, it's becoming more volatile, but we can manage that. There's not an extended thinking going, well, we can manage that today, but we also need to think about how we're mitigating it long-term into the future. We still have political parties pushing back strongly on net zero and effectively just any response to climate change. Whereas those Pacific nations and those Asia Pacific countries that see and feel these harms have a different appreciation, I think, for the consequences of actions, because they actually can feel them. Every person suffers as a consequence of what's happened in the past, and there's a need to then look to the future to make sure that doesn't continue to harm.
Yeah, exactly. And then going back to like why those countries then invest in national sovereign space missions. So the Philippines Space Agency does an amazing job of communicating to the general public, like, all of these horrific things that you're having to undergo with these climate disasters. Well, that's why we need this Earth observation satellite, and everyone gets it. Everyone gets why, you have to make decisions about what you're going to invest in. This is actually going to help us.
Whereas we look at Australia and we cancel every space mission we announce. Even if it's a strategic space mission with military interests, which would typically have broader public appeal, the moment you put a number to these things, there's an inherent cultural cringe, might be the way of describing it. Like, we don't want to know how much it costs, because the moment it costs something, it's like, well, yeah, but petrol prices are this, public transport is this, the groceries are going up. Why do I care about orbit? Why would I care that Australia could have a small constellation of its sovereign Earth observation satellites? What benefit does that do to me right here in this moment? Is it taking a photo of me walking into the shopping centre? No, it's not. It's not about that. It's bigger thinking. It's more than the individual. And I think it's very hard to communicate that in Australian society. And there's just a lack of appreciation for the long-term investments that come with these things.
Yeah, well, we haven't quite got government decision makers to understand that either. And in some ways it's a little risky for us in this series of RegSAT to be focusing on these on-orbit activities, these kind of, I think it sounds probably to a lot of people quite science fiction-y to be talking about rendezvous and proximity operations and debris removal on orbit and data centres on orbit. So it's a little bit risky for us to have focused on that, and yet there are going to be more and more Australian companies doing these kinds of activities. And I guess maybe the risk isn't so great in the sense that our intended audience is the regulator. It's the space agency and other government regulators to do with these activities. Yeah, I don't know, what do you think about that? Do you think it'll be a risk in terms of communicating to government why we've chosen this area?
I think so, but then it's about contextualising it. So we have space companies here in Australia who are doing things or want to do things. And from a sovereign investment and security perspective, are we allowing those things to happen from our jurisdiction, or are we effectively pushing them away through regulatory uncertainty or regulatory burden either way? Because businesses here in Australia already look overseas. They're already looking to customers in foreign governments. They're already looking to build things for other companies overseas. So they've found markets that are not us. They can effectively, it makes us the service provider, which is amazing. But are we actually receiving any benefit from the investments? No, because we're not appreciating the importance of it in the first place. So it's very hard to communicate, and I think in the current very competitive and conflict-driven society where everything is dramatic one day and the 24-hour news cycle means it's gone the next, if 24 hours is even appropriate anymore. It's
24
like
minutes.
24 minutes. Things change so rapidly, it's just hard to keep on focus and on track. And we've seen that, I think we'll see that constantly with space in Australia. We can't have a consistent space policy that lasts more than a couple of years. Electoral cycles are somewhat quick in global comparative context, which means policy making doesn't happen with long-term thought. And so I think these projects are useful because it means we actually, as academics, don't necessarily have the financial buy-in because we're not on risk personally. We have the opportunity to spend time thinking, and that's what we're paid to do. And we're engaged to reach out to industry, to talk to industry in a relatively open and pragmatic way to understand all these competing interests to make the case for why something should be different. And that's what I'm hoping we're doing. The hard part is getting a government minister to listen and to prioritise these aspects. We have to make the case that there is some sort of, I don't want to say dire need, but there is a need to respond, that there is a problem and that problem can be fixed, and it can be fixed with direct, clear government action.
Beautiful line to finish on. Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
So shifting gears a little bit now, Melissa De Zwart and I had a conversation about lunar activities that are forthcoming, imminent in the next couple of years. The question of space mining and the differences and perhaps also the similarities between the International Lunar Research Station, which is the Chinese-Russian collaborative program, and the Artemis Accords. So in this series of WRegSAT, we're not actually going to be looking at lunar activities. We have tried to limit the scope to look at on-orbit and in-space activities. And even though you could say lunar activities are in space, we've decided actually that is probably going to be our topic for Series 3 in 2027. Nevertheless, Melissa and I had a really interesting chat about, because the topic had come up, and also because she and I have spoken a lot and written a lot in the past about these competing frameworks for lunar activities. And I think it's quite interesting the way that it weaves into some of the other issues that we spoke about across the WRegSAT workshop.
Hi, Melissa. It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you.
So we're at WRegSAT. I'm losing my voice already.
Fair.
But we had a big long chat today about whether or not to include lunar and space mining, and it's kind of the hot topic, but I wonder if that's even maybe a reason for us not to get distracted, just because it's in the headlines. What do you reckon?
I spend a lot of my time thinking about it, worrying about it, stressing about it, and then also being in awe of it. So for me, it's very hard for me to be objective about it because it's a topic I'm really passionate about, and I do think it is the security tension point. It could be a great point of cooperation because I think it would be wonderful if the China-led ILRS and the US Artemis Accords were able to find a way to work together. Obviously, I know that there's Wolf Amendment, there's impediments, there's all that. But if we look at something like the ISS as providing humanity with the opportunity to be the best that they can be, to work together in times of conflict, I see the moon as something that could offer that opportunity. So I suppose the eternal optimist in me is saying, let's strive for the best, let's aim for the best and do it the right way. So I think it's probably something that could be left to next year, but of course we just never know when we're going to wake up one day and someone's going to say, hi, I'm here.
Yeah, too late. And as you said today, there's no evidence that there's any difference between the ILRS and the Artemis Accords in terms of transparency, sharing information, safety zones, which we are not so comfortable about, but actually they both agree probably that's what they'll be doing. Yeah. So there's no evidence that although those two countries, well, I actually think the US probably wants to work less with China than China wants to work with the US, right? So there's no evidence that the two programs are that different. And there's also talk of like, if you could do a big science diplomacy mission, like do a massive radio telescope on the dark side of the moon that's just about learning about the universe and do that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, got to remember that, the Artemis missions involve a lot of other countries as well, and as does the China program. So yes, we sort of focus on the two lead states, but there's a lot of other states there too who would like to have the opportunity to participate. And so I hope that, as you say, the big mission, the big peacemaking, the big science mission is something that we focus on that. We focus on the science rather than, the conflict. But also, there's massive potential for commercial operators to get there before government missions.
So that's it for the first episode in this 2-episode series about the WRegSAT workshops. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing different perspectives, different career pathways, and different lenses on the issues that we are grappling with. And the next episode will be forthcoming very soon. The Australasian Centre for Space Governance is a not-for-profit association. We are a transdisciplinary hub, bridging expertise in space law, policy, history, political and social sciences to advocate and shape perspectives on responsible space governance, ensuring that space supports well-being, prosperity and sustainability for current and future generations across the Asia-Pacific. The Space Matters podcast is supported by research funds of the Australasian Centre for Space Governance and is produced by Daniel McKay. You can find out more about today's guest in our show notes, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Watch this podcast video on YouTube or listen on your favourite podcasting platform.